3 a.m. The quiet of my old Boston brownstone shattered. It wasn't a knock. It was a desperate pounding that shook the floorboards and rattled the century. Old glass in the windows. I sat bolt upright in bed, heart hammering against my ribs. Instinct, honed over 30 years on the force, cut through the fog of sleep like a blade. Nothing good ever comes knocking at 3 in the morning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is, where you are now. The pounding came again, a frantic rhythm of bare fists against solid oak. Not the doorbell. This was primal. This was fear. My legs swung over the side of the bed, the old hardwood cold against my bare feet. My chest felt tight, a familiar vice grip I hadn't felt since I'd turned in my badge. Every creak of the stairs as I descended seemed deafening in the unnatural silence between the volleys of noise. My hand found the banister, the wood smooth and cool beneath my grip. Whoever was out there was desperate. They weren't stopping. At the bottom of the stairs, I flipped the switch for the foyer light, flooding the entryway in a harsh, unforgiving glare. My fingers, clumsy with sleep and a surge of adrenaline, fumbled with the deadbolt, then the chain lock. The moment my hand touched the doorknob, the pounding stopped. An eerie silence fell, thick and heavy with anticipation. I pulled the door open. She stood on my porch, a silhouette against the hazy glow of the gas street lamp behind her. For a split second, she was just a shape, a stranger. Then she stumbled forward into the light, and my world stopped turning. It was my daughter, Laura. But it was a version of her I had never seen, not even in the darkest corners of my old life as a cop. Her left eye was swollen completely shut, a grotesque blossom of purple and black that spread from her eyebrow to her cheekbone. Dried blood was caked at the corner of her split lip. But it was her throat that made the air leave my lungs. Dark, distinct finger marks circled her neck like a monstrous necklace. I could count each one. 5 impressions. The shoulder of her dress was torn, hanging loose and exposing the strap of her bra. She looked at me, her good eye wide, with a terror so profound it seemed to steal the very air around us. She wasn't just hurt. She was broken. Shattered in a way that went far beyond bruises and torn fabric. "Dad," she whispered, and the sound was not her voice. It was a fractured, hollow thing, a ghost of a sound. Then her knees buckled. I lunged forward, catching her just as she collapsed. Her weight was a dead weight in my arms, and I staggered back, wrapping my arms around her trembling frame as she began to sob into my chest. They were not the tears of simple sadness. They were the gut-wrenching, soul-tearing sobs of someone who had stared into the abyss. She smelled of fear, a sharp, metallic scent I knew all too well. It was the smell of a victim. I held her tight, the old uniform shirt I slept in soaking through with her tears. My mind was a blank, a roaring white noise of disbelief, and a fury so cold and deep it burned. This was my daughter, my Laura. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her face a mess of pain and shame. Her voice came again, that same broken whisper that would haunt my sleep for years to come. "Dad." Richard hit me. The 2 words hung in the air between us, more devastating than any gunshot. Richard hit me. For a moment, the father in me wanted to crumble, to howl with a rage that could level city blocks. But decades of training took over, a cold, hard sheath of professionalism encasing the inferno in my chest. The father grieved, but the cop had a job to do. "Inside," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the chaos inside me. "Come on, Laura, inside now." I didn't guide her to the soft couch in the living room. I steered her toward the harsh, fluorescent light of the kitchen. This wasn't a place for comfort, not yet. This was a place for assessment. This was a crime scene. I pulled out a chair from the old wooden table and gently eased her into it. She winced as she sat, a sharp intake of breath telling me more than words could. Under the unforgiving overhead light, the full extent of the damage was brutally clear. Every bruise, every mark, every sign of what that man had done to my daughter. "Don't move," I instructed, keeping my voice a low, even command. Years of talking down suspects, of controlling chaotic scenes, helped me sound calmer than I felt. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. I crossed to the freezer and pulled out a tray of ice, the plastic cracking loudly in the silence. My hands shook, just slightly, as I wrapped the cubes in a clean dish towel, tying the corners with a sharp tug. Water from the melting ice dripped onto the linoleum floor, each drop an unbearable tick of a clock. I grabbed a glass, filled it from the tap, and brought both back to the table. Laura flinched when I gently pressed the ice pack against her swollen eye. Her good eye looked up at me, and what I saw in it nearly broke me. It wasn't just pain, it was shame. Deep, soul-crushing shame. As if this was somehow her fault. "Drink," I said, placing the glass in her trembling hand. She took a small, obedient sip. Then, I pulled my phone from my robe pocket. I swiped to the camera, the familiar click of the app opening echoing in the quiet room. The flash was a bolt of lightning, stark and sudden, illuminating her injuries. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Documenting," I replied, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I moved around her, taking photos from multiple angles. Her face, her throat, the torn dress. Each flash felt like a betrayal, a violation of her privacy, but a necessary one. "We'll need these," I said. She didn't protest. She just sat there, a statue of misery, holding the ice pack and letting me work. When I was done, I put the phone away and sat down across from her. The father returned, pushing the cop back into his cage. I reached across the table, my hand covering hers. It was ice cold. "Okay," I said softly. "Talk to me, honey. Tell me everything." She looked at me, and the dam of her composure finally broke. Her story came in fragments, whispered between sobs. A hairpin found under their bed. The confrontation. The explosion of rage. He'd called her worthless. He'd told her Jessica was younger, prettier, better. That Laura should be grateful he'd stayed with her at all. As she spoke, my gaze drifted to the torn fabric on her shoulder. The delicate blue cloth ripped away, and suddenly, I wasn't in my kitchen at 3:30 in the morning anymore. The linoleum floor dissolved, the smell of fear faded, replaced by the scent of white roses and champagne. I was seeing another dress, a white one, made of lace and silk. And I was seeing my daughter, radiant and smiling, spinning on a dance floor high above the Boston skyline, her hand in mine, whispering a question that I had answered so terribly, terribly wrong. June 14th, 2014. The reception was in a glass-walled ballroom overlooking Boston Harbor. 8 years ago, but the memory was as sharp as a shard of broken glass in my mind. 100 guests, champagne flowing like water, and the setting sun painting streaks of orange and purple across the waves. Everything looked perfect, a fairy tale. Laura had been radiant. Her wedding dress was all lace and silk, her dark hair swept up in an elegant twist. I'd watched her float through the room, her smile lighting up everything it touched. Richard stayed close to her side, his hand always on her elbow, or the small of her back. At the time, I'd told myself it was devotion. Now I knew better. It was possession. Even then, there were moments. Small, discordant notes in the symphony of the perfect wedding. Things that nagged at me. Things I chose to ignore. Laura had stood to give a thank you speech. She'd barely started, her voice full of joy, when Richard had smoothly taken the microphone from her hand. "Honey, that's not quite how we met. Let me tell it," he'd said with a charming laugh. The guests had laughed with him. Nobody noticed how the light in her eyes had dimmed, how her smile had become a little more brittle, I noticed. Later, at the head table, I'd watched him order her meal without asking what she wanted. "She'll have the salmon. She needs to watch her figure," he'd announced to the waiter, winking as if sharing a private joke. Laura had laughed it off, but I saw the flush of red that crept up her neck. I saw the way his hand gripped her wrist under the table, the white pressure marks he left behind when he finally let go. I saw how she'd rubbed the spot absently while smiling at a guest. Wedding jitters, I'd told myself. He's just nervous. A convenient lie. Then came our dance. The DJ played something classic and slow, and the lights dimmed. A spotlight followed us to the center of the floor. Laura's hand rested on my shoulder, and my hand found the small of her back. We began to sway, the glittering Boston skyline our backdrop. It was a perfect movie scene. "Daddy," she'd whispered, her voice so soft I almost missed it over the music. She leaned close to my ear. "Do you think he really loves me? Sometimes he's so controlling." That was it. That was the moment. The door had cracked open, and she was asking me to see the darkness behind it. She was asking for help, for permission to doubt, and what had I done? I had smiled reassuringly and pushed the door shut. "It's just pre-wedding nerves, sweetheart," I'd said, the words tasting like poison in my memory now. "Every man gets anxious. Give it time, he'll settle down." Her face had searched mine, looking for something more, some sign that I understood, but I gave her nothing. I gave her a comforting lie, because the truth was too complicated, too messy for that perfect day. I watched the desperate hope in her eyes win out over her fear. She wanted to believe me. So she did. The song had ended. The applause was thunderous, and Richard was there instantly, cutting in, pulling Laura away from me with a possessive tug that was disguised as playful. I'd watched them dance, watched his grip on her waist, and I turned back to the champagne, ignoring the sick, heavy feeling in the pit of my stomach. The memory dissolved, and I was back in my kitchen. The smell of fear had returned. I looked at my daughter, asleep and broken on the chair, the grotesque bruises on her face a testament to my failure. I had seen the monster on his best behavior, and I had done nothing. The wedding wasn't an event, it was a symptom. The disease festered in the years that followed, and I had a front-row seat to the slow decay. We had a spot, a little cafe in the North End with exposed brick walls that always smelled of dark roast espresso. It became the stage for my failure, one cup of coffee at a time. The first time, about a year after they were married, she arrived looking different. Thinner. She wore a high-necked sweater, even though it was a warm spring day. We talked about safe things, her teaching job, my slow adjustment to retirement. The conversation was easy until she mentioned her college friends. "Richard thinks I should spend less time with them," she had said, her eyes fixed on the traffic outside. "He says they're bad influences." Something in my chest had tightened, a cop's gut instinct. "That's not concern, Laura. That's control." "You're being overprotective, Dad," she'd shot back, a defensive edge to her voice I'd never heard before. "He just sees things I don't." Her phone had buzzed on the table. Once, twice, 3 times, in under a minute. Her shoulders tensed with every notification. "I should go," she'd said abruptly, gathering her things. I'd watched her hurry out, barely touching her latte. I told myself she was an adult. I told myself I had to let her make her own choices. I was a fool. 2 years later, we met again. She had baby Alex then. She was 15 minutes late, rushing in with apologies tumbling from her lips. She looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she wore a baggy sweatshirt and loose jeans that seemed designed to make her invisible. Her face had lit up, just for a moment, when she talked about my grandson, his first smile, his sleep schedule. But underneath the proud mother talk, the poison seeped through. "Richard says I'm not losing the baby weight fast enough," she'd trailed off, shame coloring her cheeks. "He says the other mothers at his firm look better than I do." A hot, white rage had flared in my chest. What kind of man says that to the mother of his child? "He just wants me to take care of myself," she'd defended quickly, as if reading my thoughts. "To be my best." Just then her phone had vibrated on the table. She jumped as if she'd been shocked, snatching it up immediately. "Hey, honey," she'd said into the phone, her voice instantly shifting, becoming smaller, apologetic. "Yes, I'm with Dad. No, just coffee. I'll be home soon to start dinner." She'd hung up and stood, gathering her purse. "I need to go." "Laura, wait," I'd started, but she was already out the door. I'd sat there for another hour, staring at her half-finished coffee. I'd seen that flinch hundreds of times in interrogation rooms, the flinch of someone conditioned by fear. But this was my daughter, and I had let her walk back into the fire. I had watched her slowly disappearing right before my eyes, and had done nothing but order another coffee. The worst was yet to come. The next time we met at the cafe, she had Alex with her. He was a toddler then, sitting silently in the corner of the booth, too quiet for a boy his age. We were talking about nothing important when Laura reached for a napkin. Her sleeve slid up her arm, and there it was. Not a suspicion, not a feeling. Evidence. A dark purple bruise, almost black, in the clear and undeniable shape of finger marks. My voice came out sharper than I intended. What happened to your arm? Panic flashed across her face. She yanked the sleeve down fast. I'm so clumsy lately, she'd stammered, not meeting my eyes. Always bumping into things. Laura, I'd leaned forward, keeping my voice low so her son wouldn't hear. If he hit you, I will... No. The word was too loud, too quick. She'd glanced at Alex, then lowered her voice. Richard would never do that. He just yells sometimes. Who doesn't yell? The lie hung in the air between us, ugly and obvious. I had seen this 100 times. The excuses, the fear, the shame. I just never thought I'd see it in my own daughter. I'd sat there holding my cold coffee, staring at the empty booth where my daughter had just lied to my face. And I'd let her. The last time we met at that cafe was in the dead of winter. She came alone. She looked 10 years older than she was. Gray strands had appeared in her hair, and her hands shook when she lifted her coffee cup. She talked about Richard's late nights, the tight money, how she hadn't been out without the children in months. Her voice cracked, and tears pooled in her eyes. For a split second, I saw she was about to break, about to finally tell me everything. Then she'd closed her mouth, swallowed hard. I'm just tired, she'd whispered. New baby, you know how it is. I'd had enough of the lies, enough of the dance. Leave him, I'd said bluntly. Come stay with me, you and the kids. She'd just shaken her head, her eyes pleading. I can't. The children need their father. What would people think? Please, Dad, don't make this harder. And that was it. I had pushed, and she had pushed back, retreating into the prison he had built for her. As she left, she paused by her car. I should have listened to you, she'd said quietly. But she'd gotten in the car and driven away. There hadn't been a next time. Not until tonight. The flood of memories receded, leaving me back in the harsh light of my kitchen. The past was a closed case file, a long list of my own failures. The regret was a physical weight, heavy enough to suffocate. But as I looked at Laura, curled and broken in the chair, the regret began to burn. It burned away the helplessness, the passivity. It crystallized into something cold, hard, and sharp. It crystallized into purpose. The time for watching was over. The time for waiting for her to be ready was over. He had crossed a line from which there was no coming back. He had declared war on my family, and he had no idea what kind of enemy he had just made. I let the weight of my failures settle for a final moment. Then I let them go. Regret was a luxury I could no longer afford. Action was the only currency that mattered now. I pushed my chair back, stood, and walked to the junk drawer by the sink. My hand found it without looking. A small, spiral-bound notepad and a ballpoint pen, standard issue for 30 years. I sat back down and placed them on the table. The gesture was deliberate. The father was stepping back. The detective was taking over. Laura watched me, her one good eye clouded with confusion. Honey, I need you to tell me, I said, my voice different now, calm, measured, the voice I used for witnesses. I need you to tell me exactly what happened tonight. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out. Every detail is important. She saw the shift in me. She saw the purpose in my eyes, and it was as if I'd thrown her a lifeline. She took a shuddering breath and began to speak. Her voice was flat, distant, the way people sound when they're describing a trauma too fresh to process. I left school early, she began. I wanted to surprise him, make his favorite dinner, pot roast. The tragic irony hung in the air. I stopped at the store, got home around 3. His car was in the driveway, which was strange. He never comes home early. She paused, tracing the rim of her water glass. The house was quiet. I went upstairs to change. Our bedroom door, it was closed. It's never closed. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I opened it, Dad. And they were there, in our bed, on the sheets I'd washed that morning. The pen in my hand stopped moving. It was her, Jessica, the woman from the pictures. She let out a laugh, a broken, hideous sound. He wasn't even sorry. He was angry at me. He started yelling, asking what I was doing home like I was the intruder. I kept writing, forcing my hand to stay steady. Subject exhibits no remorse. Instead, displays aggression toward victim. She laughed at me. Laura whispered, tears streaming down her face now. She said I was pathetic, that she was younger, prettier, that Richard had been complaining about me for years. Avsu. The pen snapped in my hand. I looked down, surprised to see ink bleeding across my palm. I hadn't even felt it break. I picked up another. I told him to get out, she continued, her voice gaining a sliver of its old fire. I told him I'd had enough. That's when he pushed me. Hard. I hit the dresser, right here. She touched her side and winced. Before I could get up, he was on me. He grabbed my throat. I looked at the bruises on her neck. 5 distinct marks. I couldn't breathe, she choked out. He was screaming in my face, calling me worthless. Said he'd wasted 8 years on me. Then he threw me toward the door. Told me to get out, that it was his house now. And the kids? I asked, my own voice tight. With his mother. A sleepover, thank God. A small mercy in an ocean of cruelty. As I ran out, she finished, her body shaking with the memory. I could hear them. Both of them. They were laughing. She fell silent, utterly spent. The whole ugly story was now laid bare on the kitchen table. She looked at me, her eyes begging for something. For what? Absolution? An answer? I put the pen down. I closed the notepad. The evidence was collected. The testimony was given. I looked my daughter, my broken, brave daughter, straight in the eye. Thank you for telling me, I said, and my voice was a vow. You are safe now. I'm going to handle this. I helped Laura from the hard kitchen chair to the soft couch in the living room. She moved like every muscle in her body was bruised. I found a blanket in the hall closet, the old blue wool one she'd claimed as hers when she was a teenager, and tucked it around her shoulders. Her eyes were already closing, exhaustion finally winning the battle against adrenaline. Sleep now, I said softly, my hand on her head for just a moment. When you wake up, things will be different. She was asleep before I left the room. I walked past my study, past the comfortable chair where I read my books. I walked to the door at the end of the hall, the one that led to the garage. The air inside was cool and still, smelling of motor oil, sawdust, and time. In the far corner, covered by a dusty canvas sheet, stood a tall, wooden locker. I hadn't opened it in 5 years. I pulled the sheet off, the canvas stiff and heavy. The locker was unlocked. I opened the door, and the hinges groaned in protest. There it was, my dress uniform, hanging perfectly, encased in a plastic garment bag, the deep, authoritative blue of the Boston Police Department. I unzipped the bag, and the faint scent of cedar and starch hit me. I pulled it out, the heavy wool fabric familiar in my hands. This was a different kind of weight. It wasn't the weight of regret. It was the weight of responsibility. I began to dress, my movements slow and deliberate, a ritual I had performed almost every day for 30 years. First the shirt, the buttons cool against my fingertips. Then the trousers, the sharp crease still intact. The leather of the belt creaked as I fastened it. The uniform was tighter in the shoulders than I remembered, a subtle reminder of the years I'd spent in retirement, growing soft. But it fit. Last, I picked up the badge. It sat in a velvet-lined box on the shelf. It was heavy, solid, the metal cool to the touch. I clipped it to my chest, right over my heart. The weight of it settled me, focused me. I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the car window. An older man stared back, his hair grayer, his face lined with a grief I'd never known before. But his eyes were clear and hard, and the badge on his chest caught the dim garage light. I didn't see a retiree. I didn't see a grieving father. I saw Officer Donovan. The transformation was complete. I walked back into the house. I was moving differently now. My back was straighter, my steps more measured. I walked to my study, closing the door quietly behind me. On the corner of the desk sat an old rotary phone, a relic I could never bring myself to get rid of. I picked up the heavy receiver. My fingers found the familiar holes. My hands were steady now. There was only one man I could call. One man who, after all these years, would understand that this wasn't just a father's rage. This was a matter of justice. My finger traced the first number of an old friend, a brother in blue. The phone began to ring on the other end of the line, each ring a hammer blow, counting down the seconds until the hunt began. The phone rang 4 times, each one an eternity. I was about to hang up when a groggy voice answered, thick with sleep. Callahan. Jack. It's Art Donovan. There was a moment of silence. Then the sleepiness vanished from his voice, replaced by the sharp alertness of a cop waking up to a crisis. Art? What the hell? It's 5 in the morning. What's wrong? I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I need your help, Jack. Official help. It's Laura. I heard him sit up, the sound of bedsheets rustling over the line. Talk to me, Art. Her husband. Richard Thorne. He put his hands on her tonight. She's here, with me. It's bad, Jack. Strangulation marks. I kept my voice professional, clinical, listing the facts as if she were a stranger, a victim in a case file. It was the only way to keep the rage from consuming me. Jesus Christ, Jack breathed. There was no pity in his voice, only a cold, shared anger. Is she okay? She will be, I said. I have her statement. I have time. Stamped photos of the injuries. I have probable cause for a felony assault charge. He's at their residence right now, most likely with the other woman. Jack didn't hesitate. There were no questions about protocol, no worries about stepping on toes. 30 years of partnership boiled down to this moment of absolute trust. What do you need? A clean arrest, I said. By the book. I need a marked unit to respond to a domestic violence call. I need you. I'm on shift in an hour. I'll grab Rodriguez. He's solid. Where do we meet? The park on Charles Street, 2 blocks from their place. Give me 30 minutes. We're there, he said. The line went dead. I hung up the phone and allowed myself one single, deep breath. The relief was immense. I wasn't alone in this anymore. The Boston PD was coming. Justice was coming. I walked over to the small desk in the living room and found a notepad. My hand was steady as I wrote. Laura, I've gone to take care of things. You are safe. Stay here and rest. I'll call you soon, Dad. I left the note on the coffee table, next to the blanket I'd tucked around her. I took one last look at my daughter. She'd shifted in her sleep, one hand tucked under her cheek, just like she used to as a child. The sight of her bruised face, so peaceful in sleep, was a knife in my heart. It hardened my resolve into something unbreakable. I grabbed my keys and my wallet, my retired badge tucked inside for identification. I walked out the front door and into the pre-dawn chill. The Boston sky was beginning to lighten in the east, shifting from inky black to a deep, bruised purple. The air was cool and clean. It felt like the whole city was holding its breath. My old sedan waited in the driveway, faithful as ever. I got in, put the key in the ignition, and the engine turned over with a familiar, low rumble. I backed out onto the quiet street, the historic brownstones of my neighborhood still dark and asleep. I drove through the empty streets, heading south. The city was just waking up. I merged onto Starro Drive, and the Charles River stretched out to my right, the water dark and still. It was a beautiful morning. A perfect morning to go hunting. Jack's patrol car was parked under a flickering street lamp, engine running but lights off, an island of readiness in the quiet park. Another car sat behind it. I pulled up beside them and cut the engine. The dashboard clock read 5:32 a.m. Jack got out first, already in full uniform, his expression grim and serious. A younger officer followed him, early 30s, sharp eyes that missed nothing. This had to be Rodriguez. I stepped out of my sedan. The uniform felt like a second skin again. Art, Jack said, his voice low. It wasn't a question, it was an acknowledgement. He glanced at my uniform, then met my eyes. A lifetime of understanding passed between us in that look. This is Officer Rodriguez. I briefed him on the way over. Rodriguez extended a hand. Mr. Donovan, heard a lot about you, sir. All bad, I hope, I said, shaking his hand. The grip was firm. Good. Mostly good, actually, he replied with the faintest hint of a smile, before his expression turned serious again. Let's make sure justice gets done. I liked him immediately. The evidence, Jack said, getting straight to business. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos I'd taken just 2 hours earlier. Laura's face, her throat. I watched their faces as they looked. I saw Jack's jaw tighten. I saw Rodriguez's eyes narrow into cold slits. There was no doubt, no hesitation. There was only the shared, quiet fury of men who had seen this evil one too many times. That's felony assault, Rodriguez said quietly. Strangulation marks are clear. Timestamp 3:20 this morning, I added, taken at my residence. Okay, Jack said, handing the phone back. Standard procedure. We knock and announce. You have the victim's statement and photographic evidence that gives us probable cause. Art, you observe. From the street, we handle all contact. Agreed? Agreed, I said. This wasn't personal, not anymore. This was a police matter. We got back in our cars. Jack's patrol car pulled out first. No lights, no siren. I followed 2 car lengths behind. The final 2 blocks felt longer than the entire drive from my house. The townhouses in the South End were quiet, respectable. Manicured lawns, expensive cars, a perfect facade. There it was. A 2-story brick townhouse, Richard's black BMW parked in the driveway. Next to it, a silver sedan, Jessica's. They were both here. Jack slid his car smoothly to the curb in front. I parked across the street at an angle, giving me a clear view of the front door. We all got out simultaneously. An upstairs window was lit. The bedroom, they were awake. I stayed by my car, exactly as promised, my arms crossed. I watched Jack and Rodriguez walk up the driveway, their movements measured and professional. They walked past the BMW, past the Honda, up the 3 steps to the front porch. The sun was just beginning to break over the horizon, casting a golden light on the quiet street. Jack raised his fist and knocked. 3 solid, authoritative raps that echoed in the morning stillness, the sound of a world about to end. 10 seconds passed. Nothing. A curtain twitched in a neighbor's window. Jack knocked again, harder this time. Boston police! Open the door! I saw movement behind the upstairs curtain, a silhouette looking down, then pulling back quickly. Another 20 seconds. A light flicked on in the foyer. I heard the faint rattle of a chain. The door cracked open 4 inches. Richard's face appeared in the gap. Hair disheveled, a bathrobe hastily thrown on, squinting against the new morning light. What the hell do you want? He grumbled. It's 6 in the morning. Oh. Jack held up his badge. Officer Callahan, Boston PD. Are you Richard Thorne? Yeah, that's me, he said, his voice thick with irritation. What's this about? We need to speak with you about an incident that occurred yesterday involving your wife, Christine. I saw it then. A flicker of panic in his eyes, quickly masked by annoyance. What incident? There was no incident. As he spoke, his eyes moved past the 2 uniformed officers. They drifted across the quiet street. They found me. They found the uniform. The mask of irritation shattered. The color drained from his face. Recognition, then shock, then the dawning, sickening horror of understanding. He knew. He knew who had come for him. Richard stammered, his face a mask of disbelief. Grover? What is this? This is harassment. Whatever she told you, it's a lie. He tried to regain his footing, tried to project the arrogance that had served him so well for so long. Officers, this is just a marital dispute, a misunderstanding. I took a single step forward off the curb, my voice carrying across the quiet street, cold and clear. A misunderstanding doesn't leave finger marks on a woman's throat, Richard. Just then a sleepy, irritated voice called from the top of the stairs. Rick, what's going on? Who is it? A young woman appeared. Jessica. Hair messed from sleep, wearing one of Richard's button-down shirts and nothing else. She froze when she saw the 2 uniformed officers in the doorway. The color drained from her face. Richard's lie about a marital dispute evaporated in the morning air. Jack didn't miss a beat. Sir, we're coming inside, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He and Rodriguez stepped over the threshold, and I followed them across the street. The inside of the house was chaos, barely concealed. An overturned end table in the foyer. Scuff marks on the wall. Rodriguez immediately began taking photos with his phone, his movements methodical. "Let's see the bedroom," Jack said, his eyes scanning the living room. The victim stated the assault took place there. "You don't have a warrant," Richard blustered, but his voice was weak. "We have probable cause." "Don't make this harder, Mr. Thorne," Rodriguez said coolly. Upstairs, the bedroom was a wreck. Sheets torn from the bed, pillows on the floor, a shattered picture frame by the dresser. Rodriguez knelt, using a pen to point to a small piece of torn blue fabric caught on the corner of the dresser. It matched Laura's dress. He carefully bagged it. "She's clumsy," Richard said, his voice pitching higher. "She fell." Rodriguez moved to the carpet's edge. "Looks like she fell here, too." He pointed to a small, dark stain on the beige carpet. "We'll need to confirm this with the lab, of course." Back downstairs, Jack took control. "Rodriguez, stay with Mr. Thorne." He then turned to Jessica, who was trying to shrink into the wallpaper. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you. In the kitchen, please." I stood in the doorway of the living room, my eyes locked on Richard. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the floor, a cornered animal. I could hear the low murmur of Jack's voice from the kitchen. Jack was a master at interrogation. He wouldn't yell. He wouldn't threaten. He would be calm. He would be reasonable. And he would be relentless. I heard him explain that she was a material witness to a felony assault, that lying to police carried its own charges. I heard the silence as he showed her the pictures on his phone. Jessica's voice, when it came, was a choked sob. It was just a fight. I didn't see everything. "Did you see him push her, Miss Croft?" Jack's voice was patient, persistent. "Did you see him put his hands on her?" A long, drawn-out silence. Then the dam broke. "He just pushed her!" The confession tumbled out between gasps and sobs. She fell into the dresser. "She wouldn't stop screaming at us. She was calling me names. He just wanted her to be quiet. He just wanted her to stop." So he grabbed her throat. The words hung in the air, damning and final. In the living room, Richard Thorne slumped onto the couch and put his head in his hands. It was over. Jack walked out of the kitchen, his face grim. He gave Rodriguez a single, sharp nod. That was the signal. Rodriguez moved behind the couch where Richard sat, a broken man with his head in his hands. Jack stood before him. "Richard Thorne," Jack's voice was formal, stripped of all emotion. "You are under arrest for domestic battery and assault. Please stand and put your hands behind your back." Richard's head snapped up, his face a pathetic canvas of disbelief and pleading. "No, wait," he stammered, looking from Jack to me. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean—" I was angry, that's all. It was just a mistake. Rodriguez didn't say a word. He simply took Richard by the arm and pulled him to his feet, expertly spinning him around and forcing his hands behind his back. Then came the sound. The sound I'd heard 1,000 times in my career, but never like this. The cold, metallic click of handcuffs locking into place. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, the sound of consequence. As Rodriguez held him, Jack began to recite the words that every cop knows by heart, the ones that mark the end of one life and the beginning of another. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." The voice droned on, a familiar liturgy of justice. Richard's shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked at me then, his eyes wide with a desperate last-ditch appeal. "Art, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Talk to her. Tell Laura I'm sorry. Please, just tell her I love her. I never meant—" I stepped forward until I was standing directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the cold fire in my eyes. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a surgeon's scalpel. 8 years, I said. You had 8 years to show her you loved her. You had 8 years to be a husband, a partner, a man. Instead, you chose to be a coward. You isolated her, you belittled her, and when you couldn't control her anymore, you put your hands on my daughter's throat. I leaned in closer. You don't get to say her name again. You don't get to say you're sorry. You get to stand in a courtroom and answer for what you did. Those are the only rights you have left. Jack and Rodriguez began to lead him toward the front door. Neighbors were on their porches now, drawn by the quiet drama, watching as Richard Thorne, the successful investment banker, was escorted out of his perfect house in handcuffs. They put him in the back of Jack's patrol car. I watched his face through the window, the mask of arrogance completely stripped away, leaving only the raw, ugly face of fear. The car door slammed shut. The engine started. I stood alone on the lawn in my old uniform as the patrol car pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street, taking the monster with it. The morning sun was warm on my face. I felt a wave of, not triumph, not joy. It was the deep, profound, and steady feeling of a terrible wrong finally being righted. It was the feeling of justice. But I knew, standing there in the quiet morning, that this was not the end. It was just the end of the beginning. The drive home was different. The sun was up, casting long shadows across the city. Boston was alive with the bustle of a new day, people heading to work, completely unaware of the justice that had been served in the quiet pre-dawn hours. Everything looked the same, but for me, the world had fundamentally shifted. I found Laura awake when I returned. She was sitting on the edge of the couch, clutching the note I'd left her, my old wool blanket pooled around her feet. She looked up as I walked in, her one good eye, a universe of fear and fragile hope. She didn't have to ask. "He's been arrested," I said, my voice gentle. "It's over, the first part anyway." Her reaction wasn't joy. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, shuddering exhalation, as if she'd been holding her breath for 8 years. The tears that came were silent, streaming down her bruised cheeks, but they were different tears, not of pain, but of release. The dam had finally broken. The next few days were a blur of logistics, a grim checklist of aftermath. I took her to the station to give a formal statement. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. I called a lawyer I knew from the old days, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who specialized in cases like this. We filed for an emergency restraining order. With each step, I saw a flicker of the old Laura return. She was still fragile, still walking through a fog of trauma, but there was a new steel forming in her spine. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a complainant. She was a survivor, taking the first, terrifying steps toward reclaiming her life. The hardest part was returning to her house. The police had finished with it, but the place felt violated, haunted by the events of that night. As we walked through the front door, I saw her flinch. This place had stopped being a home. It was just a house filled with ghosts. We were packing a few of the kids' things when the doorbell rang. We both froze. I put a hand on her arm and went to the door myself. There was no one there, but on the porch sat a large casserole dish, still warm to the touch, a cloud of steam fogging the plastic wrap. Tucked under the handle was a simple, handwritten note. "Thought you and the children might need this. Stay strong. Eleanor Gable, number 42. Mrs. Gable, the elderly widow from 2 doors down." I looked over and saw her watering her roses. She met my eyes, gave a slow, deliberate nod of understanding, and then turned back to her flowers. There was no pity in her look, only solidarity. It was the first crack of light in a long, dark night. The next day, another neighbor left a bag of groceries by the door. A small act of kindness, a quiet message. "You are not alone. We see you. We are with you." That evening, I watched Laura stand in her own kitchen, staring at the casserole on the counter. Richard had spent years convincing her that she was isolated, that the world was a cold and judgmental place. But here was proof to the contrary. Here was the quiet, unassuming strength of a community closing ranks around one of its own. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but this one was different too. For the first time since she'd appeared at my door, my daughter smiled. A small, watery, but genuine smile. 6 weeks later, I stood with my daughter on the steps of the Suffolk County Courthouse. For 30 years, I had climbed these steps as a cop, an instrument of the law. Today, I climbed them as a father, my daughter's hand trembling slightly in mine. The courtroom was an intimidating cathedral of dark wood and high ceilings, smelling of floor polish and the weight of 100 years of human drama. We sat behind the prosecutor's table. Across the aisle, Richard sat with his lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Richard had lost weight. His face was drawn and pale. He tried to catch Laura's eye, but she stared straight ahead, a statue of resolute calm. "The Commonwealth versus Richard Thorne," the clerk called out. My heart hammered against my ribs. The prosecutor called her first witness. "The Commonwealth calls Laura Bennett to the stand." Laura stood. Her legs shook, but she walked to the witness stand with her head held high. She took the oath, her voice quiet but clear. She found my eyes in the gallery, and I gave her a single, steady nod. "You can do this." The prosecutor began gently, having Laura recount the events of that night. She described finding him with Jessica, the argument, the mockery, then the violence. "He pushed me," Laura said, her voice never wavering. "I fell backward and hit the dresser. Then, when I tried to get up, he grabbed my throat. I couldn't breathe." She looked directly at the judge. "He squeezed until I thought I would pass out." The photos I had taken in my kitchen were displayed on a large screen. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The jury's expressions hardened. Then came the cross-examination. Richard's lawyer approached, all false sympathy. "Mrs. Bennett, isn't it true you were shouting at my client? That you, in fact, provoked this unfortunate situation?" Laura's jaw tightened. She looked not at the lawyer, but at Richard. "I shouted because I found my husband in our bed with another woman," she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "That does not give him the right to put his hands on me. Nothing justifies what he did." She held firm against every one of his slimy questions. When she stepped down, I had never been prouder in my life. She hadn't just testified, she had reclaimed her truth. Jack testified next, detailing the arrest. Rodriguez followed, presenting the evidence. The torn fabric, the blood samples. Then Jessica was called. She looked small and scared. Reluctantly, she confirmed the affair. Under pressure from the prosecutor, she finally broke. "Did you see Mr. Thorne place his hands on his wife's throat?" the prosecutor asked. A long, terrible pause. Then a barely audible whisper. "Yes." The evidence was overwhelming. The judge, a stern woman who looked like she'd seen every lie known to man, called a brief recess before returning with her verdict. "Mr. Thorne, please rise." Richard stood, swaying slightly. "Based on the evidence presented, this court finds you guilty of domestic battery," she said, her voice carrying no emotion, only the finality of the law. Richard crumpled back into his chair, as if his strings had been cut. I looked at Laura. Her shoulders were shaking. I put my arm around her as quiet, convulsive sobs began to rack her body. They were not tears of pain. They were tears of relief. The battle had been won. The final act took place a few months later, in a sterile conference room on the 15th floor of a downtown Boston skyscraper. The view of the city was panoramic, but the room itself was impersonal, all steel and glass, a cold and fitting place to execute the death of a marriage. Laura was dressed in a navy blue suit, her posture impeccable, her expression calm. She looked like a CEO about to close a major deal. I sat beside her, simply a quiet presence of support. At precisely 10 a.m., the door opened. Richard's lawyer entered first, followed by Richard himself. He looked worse than he had in court. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his eyes were hollow, and his hands trembled slightly as he set down his briefcase. A uniformed security guard stood by the door, a silent reminder of the restraining order. Richard's eyes found Laura, and his composure broke. "Laura, please," he began, starting to move around the table. "Just 1 minute." "Mr. Thorne," Laura's lawyer, Margaret, said, her voice like ice, "you are here to sign documents. Nothing more. Please, take a seat." He sat heavily, but his eyes never left my daughter. "I wrote to you," he said, his voice raspy. 14 letters. Did you read any of them?" "No," Laura said. The single word was flat, cold, and final. It left no room for hope. "I'm sorry," he pleaded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Every day. I am so sorry for what I did. I'll do anything. Therapy, whatever you want. Just give me one more chance." Laura leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped on the polished table. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it filled the entire room. "You had 8 years of chances, Richard. 8 years I asked you to be kinder, to listen, to stop trying to control every part of my life. You chose not to. Then you chose violence. It was one mistake, he whispered. One terrible moment. No, she said, shaking her head slowly. It was the final moment in years of mistakes. You diminished me. You isolated me. You cheated on me. And then you put your hands on my throat. That is who you are, and I am done pretending otherwise. He played his last card. What about Alex and Lily? You're taking my children from me. You lost them yourself, Laura replied, her voice unwavering. When they are older, they can decide if they want you in their lives. But right now, my only job is to protect them from learning that love looks like what you did to me. He finally broke. His face crumpled, and he stared down at the table, a completely defeated man. Mr. Thorne, his own lawyer said gently, we need to sign. Margaret slid the stack of documents across the table. Laura picked up the pen first. Her hand was perfectly steady. She signed her name page after page. Not Laura Thorne, Laura Bennett. The signature was clean, clear, and decisive. She was not just signing a legal document. She was signing her Declaration of Independence. The papers were pushed to Richard. He stared at them for a long moment, then picked up the pen, his hand shaking. When the last painful signature was complete, Margaret collected the documents. That concludes the proceedings, she announced. Miss Bennett, you are now legally divorced. We stood. Laura picked up her purse and turned toward the door without a backward glance. Laura, wait! Richard called after her, his voice a pathetic cry. She didn't even pause. She just kept walking, her back straight, her step certain, out the door and into her new, free life. We were sitting on a blue checkered blanket in the Boston Public Garden. A year to the day since Laura had appeared at my door, she had chosen this date deliberately, not to mark an anniversary of trauma, but to reclaim it, to transform it into a celebration of survival. She spread the picnic basket with practiced ease. A year ago, her hands would have trembled. Today, they moved with confidence. The change was in everything about her, the way she stood, shoulders back instead of hunched, the way she smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached her eyes. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a sparkling, hard-won joy. Over here, Dad, she waved from the spot she'd chosen near the lagoon. I walked over with the cooler as Alex and Lily, now 9 and 6, raced ahead of me with a soccer ball. Their laughter filled the air, free and uninhibited. They were no longer the quiet, solemn children I'd seen in the cafe years ago. They were just kids, safe and happy. Can you believe it's been a year? She asked, handing me a sandwich. Some days it feels like yesterday, I said. Other days, a lifetime ago. Both, she agreed, biting into an apple. A year ago, I couldn't imagine ever feeling safe again, let alone happy. But here we are. She told me about her life now. She'd been promoted to head pediatric nurse at the hospital. A few months ago, she'd noticed the familiar, terrified flinch in a young mother whose child was a patient. Drawing on her own experience, she had gently guided the woman toward the hospital's resources. Now, she was helping them develop a new protocol to better identify and support at-risk families. She was turning her scars into a shield for others. And you, Dad? She asked. Mrs. Gable told me you've been busy. I smiled. I volunteer a couple of days a week at a downtown shelter. I help the residents document their cases, organize their evidence for the police, just putting the old skills to good use. I had turned my regret into a purpose. And Richard? I asked quietly. Her expression didn't even flicker. He sees the kids twice a month, supervised. They're polite to him. That's all I can ask. The restraining order is still in effect. To be honest, she said, looking out at the swan boats gliding across the water, I don't feel anything for him anymore. Not even hate. He's just someone I used to know. Alex ran over then, breathless and grinning. Grandpa, watch this! He kicked the ball in a perfect arc. Lily chased after, her pigtails flying, trying to do the same. Laura watched them with a look of such pure love, it transformed her whole face. That's what I fought for, she whispered. That's what you helped me win. You did the fighting, sweetheart, I said, my voice rough with emotion. I just backed you up. She leaned her head on my shoulder. We did it together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, we packed up our things. Lily tugged on my sleeve. Grandpa, can we do this again next year? Every year, Alex added firmly. Like a tradition. Laura ruffled his hair. Every year, she agreed. Our family picnic day. Walking to the car, tired and happy, she looked back at the park. 1 year ago, I knocked on your door thinking my life was over, she said quietly. Turns out it was just beginning. For 30 years as a cop, I thought I understood justice. I saw it as something loud sirens, gavels, the click of handcuffs. But I learned, late in life, that the most profound justice is often quiet. It's the courage to finally see what's been in front of you all along. It's the quiet decision to stop making excuses and to act. Evil thrives in the silence of good people. It counts on us to look away. The greatest lesson I ever learned wasn't in a precinct. It was in my own kitchen at 3 a.m. It's that you're never too old to right a wrong, and that the fight for your family is the only one that truly matters. If this story of resilience and a father's love resonated with you, please let us know. Your thoughts are an important part of this community. Share your impressions in the comments below, like this video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss another story that matters. Thank you for watching.